Hello there, I'm Jimmy Vegas and this is how to create a hyper-casual game in Unity, and welcome to episode 4. In this tutorial we're going to take a look at creating some UI on screen, and we're also going to start some C# programming. Don't forget, click on the subscribe button and click that bell icon as well to stay up to date with every tutorial still to come in this series and everything else on game development on my channel. And if you've enjoyed this series so far, please feel free to check me out on Patreon or YouTube memberships where you'll get things like exclusive content, early access to many of these tutorials, project files, and so much more. With that in mind, let's get to work. So, I briefly mentioned last tutorial what UI was, and essentially all it is just some on-screen overlay. For example, some text that says score, some buttons or whatever. So we're going to get into that, and then we're going to use the C# coding to change what it says on screen. So, firstly, let's go to Game Object, let's go to UI, and let's select Text. Now, we won't really see too much apart from this down here. In the hierarchy, we will see three new things added, but if we close that up, it's just two. So the first one is the canvas, and the second one is the event system. We won't really be touching the event system because there's no point to us modifying or changing anything at this stage. We will, however, be changing the canvas and the object known as text inside it. So on the text itself, firstly, let's change this color. Let's change it to white so we can see it a little bit easier. And it says down there, new text. Now, anything UI based really has to remain inside the canvas if you want it to be an on-screen visualization. For example, if we were to remove this text from the canvas and place it in the main hierarchy, it would disappear. It has to be contained in the canvas for it to be seen. So, what are all these components on this text? So the first one, the rect transform, this is much the same as the transform component on other game objects, where you just basically dictate its position and its size and its rotation. And that's all based here. Some things are a little bit different, it does look slightly different, but you don't need to worry about that too much. Another way of playing around with that particular transform is double clicking the text, and it will show you exactly where it is. And if we zoom out now, we can see a white outline. This white outline reflects what we see here. So this is basically a reflection of what the screen is, or a representation is a better word, I think. So we could move that text to wherever we would need it to be. So for example, if we select the rect tool, we could move this up to the top. So let's do so. And you'll see some lines do highlight different colors as we move it around. That means they're being snapped to either position. So that one means it is being snapped to dead center. This one means it's being snapped to the left. Now, obviously we don't want it right on the left because there's no space between the start of the text and the edge of the screen. So let's move that into a bit more of an acceptable place. So let's zoom in a touch and let's place it about here maybe. Or should we have it the other side? Do you know what? I think we're going to have that about there. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a couple of different overlays on top of each other here, with this being our score. Now, we can't really see it too well because of how our skybox is, but that's what we're going to sort out. So here is where we can modify the text. So let's change this text to say score 0. So that's our current score. We do have the option to change font. However, you do need the font installed in Unity itself, and it does come with 2. So I'm going to stick with Arial for now, but we are going to bring in a font that is commercially free that we can use to make it look a little bit better. Font style, let's go with bold to make it a bit more apparent, and let's change the font size to 30, make it a little bit larger. Now, it has disappeared from this UI element, so all we need to do is make sure we're on a rect tool, and we can drag like so. Now, further down, we have the alignment, and obviously we have the left, middle, and right, and we have upper, middle, and bottom. So these aren't really going to make too much of a difference. It's these which may do. So I'm going to keep mine aligned to the left, right there. Then obviously we have the overflow if you want to wrap it, which, is probably a wise idea if you have a big, long score. All that really means is that it gets wrapped. So it ends up down here. So we can see here I'm just changing the size of the object itself using the rect tool up top. Vertical overflow, let's keep it as truncate for now, and colour, let's stick with white. Material, we don't really need to worry about the material because we're not going to be dealing with anything fancy just yet. So how do we make this a little bit more visible than what it currently is? Well, let's add some more UI. So on the canvas itself, or on the text, it's entirely up to you, but we're still going to move it into the same place, or you could theoretically go to Game Object, UI, and do it that way, but I'm just going to go on text, and I'm going to right click, I'm going to go to UI, and then I'm going to add in raw image. This raw image will appear as a white square by default. However, we can modify this to make it look a little bit more interesting. Now, you can attach an image to it if you want to. That is entirely your prerogative. We're just going to play around with some colors for now, and perhaps maybe add in images later on. So the actual components we have here are same as before, the rect transform, which means we can change it, move it however we need to. And we also have this raw image, and it's this color that we're going to change. So I'm going to change it to black, but I'm also going to reduce the alpha to, let's say, about 150. We'll change it to 150, that'll do. So we can kind of see through it. It's translucent, but it's not completely transparent. Now, the next thing to note is the order of everything within the canvas. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this raw image out of the canvas and place it above text. And you'll notice that the text here is now more prominent than what it was. If we bring the text above the raw image, you'll notice it's not. So the reason for this is everything in the canvas is drawn in sequence or rendered in sequence. So if the text is at the bottom, this text will always be on top of everything else inside the canvas. Same with this raw image. If that's at the bottom, that'll always be right at the back of everything that is rendered. So you could think of it as being an order of whatever is a UI element. So let's change this raw image to kind of be a box around our score. So I'm going to move it to probably about there. I think I'm going to move the score again. I'm going to increase the size to about there. That should do. And I'm going to rename it and call it panel 01. And hold control, press D to duplicate. And you can see there already that this is now on top. So therefore that score text has gone darker. However, if we bring it up to there, it's now lighter again. So I'm going to change this to panel 02. And panel 02, I'm going to shrink a little more. But what I'm going to do is just move text out of the way and then shrink like so. So now we have what appears to be a bit of a box around our text. So if we do that, place that back in there, we can see up here our score is much more visible. Now it's entirely up to you how you want to work with all of this. This is just something quick and simple that I've put together. I recommend taking more time to kind of work with UI and make it look a little prettier, we should say. So the final thing I'm going to do before we get into some coding is to right click and rename this text to say score display. So anytime we reference the score, it's going to be contained within this game object. So let's get onto some C# coding now. Let's go to our assets folder, right click, create folder, and we'll call this scripts. And in here, let's create another folder and we'll call this UI. So anything UI based, let's place within this folder. So now the next thing to do is right click, create C# script. And what we'll do with this is we'll call it score updater. Now, it is important what you call this script file. I'll explain why in just a moment. But once you've got its name and named it, hit return or enter, and you'll be taken to Visual Studio. And this is what we're going to do all the programming in. So Visual Studio may take a couple of minutes to open up for the first time. Sometimes it can be quite quick. Sometimes it's quite slow. I think it just depends how it feels, to be honest, much like humans. So you'll always be greeted with this. And this is the default script. This is just something real simple. And I'm going to go through pretty much everything here to kind of help you understand how this is all going to work. So coding, I think, is always considered the hardest part of game development. But I'm sure I've mentioned earlier in the series that if you take it slowly, be methodical, it's easy to work your way around it. So what do we have here? These are the top where we have using system.collections, using system.collections.generic, and using Unity Engine. These are known as a namespace. So here is where we can help the script realize and recognize words that we would use later on. Now, because we're going to be doing some UI in this, we need to make the script recognize some UI elements that we're going to use. That means that we have to add in a namespace by going using Unity Engine.UI with a semicolon. Why a semicolon? Lines end with a semicolon in C#, unless, for example, it is moving on to the next line, or for example, a method, which is a close or open curly bracket. Usually something like this will go together. What is this here? This is known as a method. So anything that says void is a method. That's how we know certain sections of the script are what we use. So in this instance, we have void start. What does void start means? That means that whenever the script is activated, any code we put here is run once and only once. What is void update? As it states here, update is called once per frame. So this means it's running constantly. But what is this that I've highlighted? Why is it green? These are annotations. So if you want to make notes in your script, you would use annotations, and they can be done by using the / right there. What is all this contained in? It's contained in the class right here. And you notice it's called score updater, which is the same as what our script name is. These two have to match. The class has to be the same as the name of the file. If you decide to change this to just score update and save it by holding Control, pressing S, if you go back into Unity, you'll be presented with a problem at some point. So if we try dragging this script onto an object somewhere over here, you can't do it. So if you ever end up with this error saying you can't be done because the script class cannot be found, it's more than likely that you've accidentally changed the name up there. So let's save. Now, as I said, everything here kind of makes sense to some degree to people who have coding experience. To newbies at coding, this probably still doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So we need to establish what we are going to do here. What we want to do is be able to make this code interact with whatever we have in our game. I'll give you an example. If we press play, nothing will happen with our UI. Our orbs will fall, our score still says 0. What we could do is let's have our score change to 100 as soon as the game starts. And we should be able to see how a script can interact with these game objects. So to do that, what we'll need to do is use the void start. Remember, void start is when we start up the script, i.e. if we attach this script to an object and press play, the script will start, providing that that game object is active. What I mean by that is that little tick up there in the inspector panel. So how do we make that score change? Real simple. We need to do something called a variable. What's a variable? A variable is a way of allowing the script to recognize items or objects within the hierarchy. So for example, we could use that score text as a variable. So I'm going to get rid of void update. It doesn't need to be there. And the same with this annotation here. That can go. That doesn't need to be there either. How do we declare a variable? In its simplest terms, we can just go public. I'll explain public in just a moment. There is a reason why we do use public in this instance. So we have to declare public, then we declare what type of variable we are going to use, and then its name. with a semicolon at the end. So what type of variable are we going to use? We're using a game object. So anything in this instance where you refer to any of these objects in the hierarchy, you are using a game object. What can we call this? Let's call it score display. Now I'm using something called camel casing here, which is the first word is a lowercase, then every subsequent word is uppercase. So score display is the name of this particular variable. And let's press semicolon to close that off. So now the script is going to know where we need to look for this. How do we actually tell it to do something? Well, we want to update a certain component. So if we go to our score display here, we want to update this specific component here, which is inside text. So the component is text and the subcomponent is also text. So keep in mind here that we're going to need to modify text and text. Now this does get a little bit complicated, but it will make sense in the end. So remember, component is text and we need to modify text. So we need to tell the script to go into score display dot get component. So it looks for the component that we're going to tell it to now, and that is, remember, text, and that's inside spiky brackets. Then you need to open and close bracket, you need your parentheses there, and then dot, and it will give you a drop down list of what you want to modify. So what do we want to modify in this drop down list? You could type the word text, or you could just click the word text. Easy. Then we'll say equals, what do we want the text to equal? In quotes, let's put score 100, and then quote, and then a semicolon, and let's save that script. So what have we done here? What we have done is we have told the script that we are going to use some UI elements in the code. We've then declared what variable we want to work with, in this case, score display, and then we've told the method, inside the method, I should say, what we want to do with that particular variable. In this case, we want to change its text to say score 100. I still haven't explained public, but we're going to get onto that now. So if we head back into Unity, and down here on the right, you'll see a little turny wheel. That means the script is just compiling. You may end up with some red text down here to say you've got an error. If you do, go into console and it will tell you where the error is. For example, if I forget a semicolon and save the script, head back into Unity, there's that red text and there is an error. Now if you double click this line here, it will take you to where it believes the error is, and it has indeed taken us to the correct area of the error. All we need to do is that semicolon. Save and head back to Unity, and that will disappear. So now, how do we get all of this working? Because yes, we've written the script, but the script still doesn't know where the object is. It's still not even in our hierarchy. So let's go to game object, create empty, and let's call this global scripts. So let's drag and drop this score update script onto global scripts. And here you will see score display. Now that is the reason why we type public. We need score display to be visible at this point because we need to drag and drop an object onto here, which will be score display. So make sure you're clicked on global scripts and you can see this here. Then drag and drop score display onto that game object area. And now the script will recognize that the variable it needs to work with is indeed this score display here. Like I said, if we didn't have the word public, we wouldn't be able to drag and drop that here. The word public enables us to see that particular variable inside the inspector panel. So now when we press play, our score should instantly update to 100. And it does. Perfect. So we can now use that to our advantage in many, many ways. So what we're going to do next tutorial is we're still going to work with some UI and C#, but what we're going to do is we're going to have some buttons here. So we could tap on the screen to do different things. And every time we tap on the screen and catch an orb, we want to add some to our score. So that's what we're going to start working with from the next tutorial. Remember, guys, if you have any problems, you can head over to the website and you can download this particular script in the downloads and assets section, or you can leave a comment and I will do my utmost try and help you guys out. Sometimes it can be a bit tough, the amount of comments I have to try and respond to, but if I don't, there are very helpful people around who are more than willing to help out. So guys, until that next tutorial, thank you very much for watching.